Hello to you all. My name is Lauri Palsa. Today I'm going to discuss and focus on these concepts of media and information literacy and media education from the point of view of educational relevance and how we can use these kind of broadly defined concepts in a meaningful manner in our own education work. I'm going to share you some insights and experiences from the Finnish context. For the past over 10 years, I have been working in Finland to promote and develop media literacy and media education nationally here. At the moment, I'm actually working at the University of Jyväskylä at the Department for Teacher Education. In our modality research projects, we are currently exploring datafication and data literacy in this kind of a context of formal education, how these questions are seen there. And I see this as a continuation from the media educational tradition that has been long been developed. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm going to start my presentation now. What I really see as important and interesting in the media literacy and media and information literacy is that this kind of a very broad and nuanced field that we are living. We are all the time looking out to the world and seeing different kind of trends, different kind of changes, movements which surrounds us, not only in the technological sense, but at the society and culture and different communities as well. Often these are quite new trends. There have been a lot of hype talk in different kind of talks. At the moment, we are discussing in different levels around the world, for example, the artificial intelligence or machine learning or datafication, but there are also very important trends that we need to take into account as well from another perspectives. For example, the polarization in the societies or the populistic rhetoric that takes place or hate speech that takes place in the social media at the moment, or even the bigger problems, for example, the climate change that we are finding, which are crucial to find the solutions to these kind of very complex and important phenomena. So we often explore, we can identify these kind of trends in the society, and then to consider and ponder about what does it mean for us as educators. We can see those positive phenomena, positive elements in the work, for example, to discuss how, for example, we can use these technologies to improve the access for the information, to the knowledge in our world, to how we can increase and strengthen the understanding that we have of the world around us, how we can communicate better, how we can express our thoughts in a more better way to reach new people and to have more democratic participation in the society where more different kind of voices are heard in the discussion. But we can also recognize a variety of different kind of more negative trends and effects or elements in those movements that we have identified. For example, there have been a lot of discussion about fake news and misinformation in the past years, which can lead to very confused situation for many of us. There are many privacy concerns that we need to take into account. There have been a discussion about these kind of threats of radicalization or the lack of social cohesion in the society. And often this leads to us this kind of a situation that we need to, at the same time, focus on the surrounding world, the trends, and also to think about them from very local perspective, from the perspective of our own practical work that we are living. And it makes the situation very complex and hard because we cannot take everything into account. And at the same time, there is this kind of a very important, very interesting relationship and balance between the fastly developing world and at the same time the long and slow processes of educational development. And also, as new technologies are invented and they become part of the media landscape that we are all living, the media itself is a very complex phenomenon and term. What do we really mean when we talk about media? So today I'm going to focus on the Finnish context. I've been worked in relation to policy quite much, for example, in policy development, policy analysis, policy implementation as well. And there is actually this media literacy policy, which is a national policy document exploring and identifying the field of Finnish media education. I was the co-author of that policy, and in that work, the policy was prepared in this kind of participatory manner. So we wanted to involve as many people from the media educational field that we could to have their voices heard in the process. And actually that was quite eye-opening experience for me, because we met so many people around the Finland from different perspectives, from different professional and educational backgrounds, and from different parts of the society, that it really illuminated me the diversity that we have in the media literacy field. When we talk about media literacy, it's not only about media literacy and media information development in the schools or in the early childhood education. It's more broader issue where we can find ways how we can tackle these questions, for example, in the fields of youth work, in the cultural sector, in the libraries, in the civil society, and also in the private sector. And I just wanted to highlight this kind of broad approach to media literacy that I understand the phenomena. But now in this talk, I'm going to focus especially on the formal education. I've been studying and exploring the past school curricula that we have had in Finland. And I have noticed that already in the 50s, there have been discussion about media education, or I would not say like media education in itself, but media educational contents, because in the 50s the media education was maybe talked in a different manner. And in the school curricula back in the 70s, it was the first time that media education became part of this kind of a consistent manner, where when this kind of a term of mass media education was introduced in the Finnish education system. So it was a more coherent program that was focused on improving media literacy and media educational contents, but different terminology have been used. And since then, for example, this kind of concepts of audiovisual education, media literacy, and multiliteracies at the current phase is used to discuss those same issues or same phenomena that we have recognized as part of very important questions in the education. At the moment, I mentioned that we are in Finland, the term and concept of multiliteracy is very important for media educators in different fields. I've been studying actually this multiliteracy in my PhD dissertation that focused on how the same concept of multiliteracy is understood in different parts of Finland, to understand the nuanced approach to these concepts. So multiliteracy at the moment in the Finnish education system, it's part of transversal competence. But multiliteracy, it's a competence related to different kind of texts. It's about interpretation. It's about competence to interpret, to produce, and to make a value judgment across variety of different texts. And as media educators, of course, this kind of a broad understanding of text is very, very familiar when we think about different kind of media texts that are currently involved in the media culture. So it's based on the broad definition of texts, and it means this kind of ability to obtain, combine, modify, produce, present, and evaluate information in different modes. It's related to development of critical thinking and learning skill as well. And multiliteracy, as the term multi implies, there are various of different literacies involved in the multiliteracy, and media literacy is one of them. Multiliteracy is developed in all school subjects, so it's a part of transversal competence. This can be developed by the pedagogy based on rich textual environment. And also what is important is that multiliteracy highlights the importance to consider and take into account the authentic texts that can be used in education, that those kind of authentic texts that are relevant for pupils and which are meaningful to them in different areas in their lives. Multiliteracy is also, it's a cumulatively developing competence. It's the same concept that is used in the curricula in early childhood education and care, in pre-primary education, as well as in basic education, and also in the secondary education, but that I have excluded here because I focus mainly on the basic education in the education system. And I just want to highlight that in early childhood education, the competence, they are not learning goals for the children themselves, but the pedagogy that supports that the education is based on. But in the basic education, multiliteracy is the outcome. So the educator, for example, in different grade level, in different subject, they don't need to take everything into account of media literacy. But what is important is that it's a long process to develop the media literacy, even though in the end of basic education, it's very broadly understood, but it is built on like step by step. So it's little by little going focused on more deeper level of multiliteracy. So one educator doesn't need to take into account of everything, but it's a cumulative process, and it's also a community-based approach to develop this kind of very broad concepts. But what I see important with this kind of broadness of the concept is that it gives a lot of autonomy, it gives a lot of flexibility for the educators to base their practice on their own expertise and their own professional vision and insights. So there is not like, because the concept is so broad, there is not like one single way to promote media education, media literacy, and media and information literacy, and also multiliteracy in the school system. So there's different kind of different kind of pedagogies, different kind of approaches, different kind of learning activities that can be applied depending on the broader goals of education, for example, in different school subjects. So to conclude this kind of contextual understanding in the field of Finnish education system and formal education and basic education more particularly, is that media education at the moment it's cross-sectoral phenomena. So we can understand that media literacy, even though we use the same concepts, we can use it in different ways in different fields, depending on the protocols, for example, in what we have, for example, in the libraries or the education system or in the private sector. And media education, it helps us, and the concept of media literacy, for example, it helps us to keep up with the changing world. So there is not like fixed terminology that we are focusing on, but we can use the strengths of different concepts to illustrate different aspects in the surrounding world. For example, in the 70s, the mass media education was used because it represented this kind of the current media culture back in the day, but now we can maybe more flexibly use, for example, the concept of multiliteracy, even though there is a continuation of the tradition of media education. Media literacy, it's in relation to this kind of a network of different literacies. So even though it can be quite confusing or even complicated, I think it's more about this kind of nuanced understanding about there is not like one literacy concept, but we can take into account various different kinds of literacies, not only focusing on media literacy, but also information literacy as well as the multiliteracy. And at the moment, I'm focusing on data literacy, which is more focused on the digital data. Multiliteracy is in the Finnish school system. It's a transversal competence. So there is not like one discipline approach to multiliteracy, but different kind of approaches can be taken depending on in what subject or what discipline are we talking about. So it highlights the importance also for this kind of interdisciplinary discussion about the meaning of the concepts and the outcomes of education. And also the one feature that I want to highlight is also that multiliteracy in the Finnish education system, it's understood as a cumulatively developing competence. So it's not like we need to take into account every aspect of multiliteracy, but it takes time and it's a step-by-step process throughout the education system. But now I have been discussing, particularly in the media literacy, in connection to the Finnish formal education system, but now I would like to take a step back and to see like the forest from the trees to understand this kind of more general aspects of the same discussion. And this was actually the question that I studied as part of my PhD research, where I focus on the concept of multiliteracy that I mentioned, but I wanted to understand how the same concept can be contextualized, how this kind of a conceptual aspect can be taken into account to illustrate the local diversity of the local context to improve the meaningfulness and relevance of the education. So we can recognize that media literacy and all those other literacy concepts, they are discussed in various levels. And then we can use the concept of conceptual contextualization to illustrate how those concepts can be understood in the local setting within the one's professional community. We can approach this question in different levels. For example, we can discuss about the rationale of the educational concepts, about the question about why, and also from a content perspective to highlight those important aspects of the concept. Because media literacy, for example, it can be it can mean so many different things, and there are so many different aspects of the media literacy. So we can use this kind of a content perspective to focus particularly on those aspects of media literacy which we as educators understood to be the most important ones and the most relevant ones. And also it's important to take into account also the practical level, what kind of methods, what can we do, and how we can develop those concepts and those aspects to those concepts that we have recognized to be the most important ones. And then we can have the mutual and shared discussion about what kind of common elements of this media literacy we can recognize, what's more cross-contextual in a sense, and what are those specific elements that are important for us, but maybe they don't have to be so important in other contexts or in other settings. For example, when we think about the cumulative nature of those educational concepts. Okay, so now I have been yammering about the importance of concept and conceptual understanding and conceptual discussion, but I think it's very important to maybe stop here for a moment to reflect and also to consider like what's the point in all of this, how we can use this conceptual understanding and to improve from the perspective of our own practical education work. I think what is important is that when we think about the nuanced and complex understanding of those concepts, they help us to support our own pedagogic autonomy. Because when we recognize the broadness of those concepts, it implies that there is not like one fixed way to promote those educational outcomes, but rather it's about our own pedagogic ideas, our own pedagogic thinking that we can use as a strength to develop the meaningful education and the media educational pedagogy that we as ourselves see to be important. I think these kind of concepts, they help us to have more this kind of reflective distance to the practice that we are living in. So it helps us to stop for a moment and to take a step back and to see maybe a more clear manner about the outcomes and the most important part of our educational work. It also, when we talk explicitly about these concepts, we can recognize different aspects and we can also explore how those aspects are related to different phenomena and different parts of the society. And also in the school setting, we can also divide the work, because media literacy is not something that should not be left for the responsibility of individual educators, but it's more about question for the community, the professional community from different perspectives who, for example, in different disciplines, understand the same concept in different ways and can bring different kind of values and different kind of strengths to the mutual task to develop media literacy. Those concepts, they help us to prioritize for our education, because it's impossible to take into account every aspect, for example, in media literacy, because it's a complex phenomena. So we need to make some kind of limitations, and what kind of, for example, we have a limited time at our hands, we have limited resources at hand, so we need to make decisions about what we are focusing on, what are the most important aspects that we need to focus on. So those conceptual discussions that we are having, it's a way to help that kind of decision making in the local level. And also, I think this kind of a concept, when we are explicitly discussing about them, they are a way not only to focus our individually in certain aspects, but they are also, can see them also as a form to build bridges between different people, but also between different disciplines and different fields in the society, to have more grounded base for cooperation, for example, and collaboration. So to conclude this presentation, I just want to highlight that this kind of the importance to take into account the diversity of the localities, which can encourage us to for the contextual conceptualization and reflective thinking. Firstly, the reflective exploration, which I understand as a practice to explore the world, to understand and to discuss about from our own perspective, what are the most relevant phenomena from media educational perspective that we see are important to take into account at the moment, and what kind of objectives or educational outcomes we can recognize to be related to those trends, and also to explore our own local educational context. What are these kind of strengths that we can use to develop our own education, and then to combine these two perspectives is to define how we can understand those concepts that they reflect to the outside world, this kind of broader phenomena, broader issues that we can recognize, and how it is connected to the local realities of our own educational practice. And the second point is a question about the power. So basically, I understand that the education itself is so valuable and important aspect that we need to have all those people who are participating into education to have their voices heard about the practices and the future and the outcomes of education as well. So we need to have the critical understanding to identify both those stakeholders, those actors who are currently involved in the educational discussion, to focusing on, for example, the future of education, and also to identify those people and stakeholders who are important, who should be part of the discussion, but for reason or another are not actually involved at the moment. And also, through these different kind of research-based approaches, we can find ways to create and to identify the most best and effective ways how we can ensure this kind of balanced participation of different stakeholders in the same discussion. And even though there's a lot of work to be done in developing this participatory contextual discussion, it's still a very important opportunity for us all to raise the quality of education and media and information literacy education. Because we can take into account those different various perspectives to the same issues and use the insights and experiences to develop our own education, so which can help us to improve the relevance of the education and the meaningfulness of media and information literacy. And this can help us to develop the quality of education and to focus on the future of education. So with this, I just want to thank you all for listening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss and share some of the ideas and insights from the Finnish context for the more general level media and information literacy discussion. Thank you very much.